Hello, good evening. Welcome to this screening of Fashion and Cinema. My name is Joana Granero, and I'm here today with Ginette Vincende.
Hello.
To explore Brigitte Bardot's work and style. Ginette Vincende, besides being a professor of film studies at King's College, she contributes regularly to Sight and Sound and BBC Radio, and she has written several books about cinema, and two of them about Brigitte Bardot. So what was that made you decide to focus part of your work on Brigitte Bardot, who is not generally acknowledged as one of the greatest actresses of French cinema? Why do you think she is important in the context of French cinema and in general?
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming to listen to us and watch the film tonight. I'm very pleased to see people always interested in Bardot. I'm a fan as well as a scholar of Bardot. As Joanna said, I wrote 2 books. I think I would say 3 reasons why Bardot was not only a very important star in the 1950s and 60s of French cinema, but also still matters today. The first one is that she was a really revolutionary figure as a woman. She was a pre-feminist icon, somebody who was really considered scandalous in those days, a kind of iconoclastic figure. That's the first reason. She really was ahead of her time in that respect. She was also the first mass media star in French cinema, I would say, in the post-war period. She was somebody who was created by the image. She was created by photography. She was a model. She was a kind of new type of star in the context of French cinema. She didn't do training. She didn't go. She didn't work on stage. She became known for her looks, for her physique, for her modeling of clothes. So. And that's something that may seem very banal today, but was actually very new at the time. And the third reason why I think she's so important is the fact that she was already at the time, and still today, I would say, imitated partly because of the way she dressed and the kind of fashion she invented. So she was really a kind of trailblazer in all these different ways. So I think that's why we're still interested in her today. Many people know Bardot who've never actually seen a single film with her, but they know what she looks like because they've seen pictures, they've seen imitations of her, and so that shows how she has lasted that long. For all these different reasons.
And so many imitations, yes. So let's talk about And God Created Woman, as this is the film that launched her into stardom. Yeah. It was released now 61 years ago in France, 60 years ago here in the UK. And Juliette, Brigitte Bardot's character, is bold and erotic, seemingly in an effortless and an intentional way. How do you see her costumes and style here, and how could you explain the extraordinary impact in audiences all around the world?
Okay, God Created Woman is the film you're about to see. As you say, came out in 1956. It wasn't her first film. She'd made about 12 to 15 films before. She started in 1952. But it's the film that really made her into a mega star on the international level. It was directed by her husband at the time, Roger Vadim, and it's a film that's very important because it was kind of announcing, as it were, it was ahead of its time also in being both, it was a classical film, but it was also showing the way to the new wave, the new cinema. It was shot on location in Saint-Tropez, as you will see, and it really made Bardot into a major star. And so why this one and not any others? I think I would say, and since we're interested in talking about fashion, I would say her character, as you will see, has 3 main characteristics, and they're all reflected in the way she's dressed. And I think it's was a kind of revolution in its own right. Her character is a young woman who becomes a kind of scandalous figure in Saint-Tropez, which was then, as you will see, if you've never seen the film before, actually looks like still like a village. Of course, today we know it's become something completely different. And she she represents the figure of youth. She's young. I mean, she was actually 22 when she made the film, but her character is supposed to be not even 18. And the clothes she wears are the clothes of the young generation. So you see her in t-shirts, you see her wearing jeans, and there's a kind of a rebellious attitude associated to that youth. And in fact, she was called by one of the French critics of the time the French James Dean, and there's a sense of she was that sort of feminine version of youthful rebellion, you know, wearing American blue jeans and t-shirts and so on. So she's a youthful figure. She's also very sexy, very beautiful, and the clothes she wears are very much designed to reveal her body. They're clinging to her. They are revealing and extremely sexy. But there's a third aspect, and because in a way, a beautiful, sexy young woman wearing revealing clothes would not be particularly original, if you like. But what made her different is that with those qualities was also associated a kind of naturalness, a sense of not innocence, but her being a natural figure. And we see her on the beach, we see her often walking barefoot, we see her wearing ordinary clothes. At one point she wears a kind of an overall, the sort of overall that people working in shops wore. But of course, the way she wears it makes it extremely sexy. That she unbuttons, she undoes some of the buttons, and so on. So I think it's that combination of youth, of sexiness, and but also a kind of naturalness, which is extraordinary. And to me, that's kind of combined in, sort of represented in a number of the clothes she wears in the film, which you will see. And in particular, there's a famous red dress that she wears. And you're going to see it at some point behind me. And the red dress is very clinging, but also made of kind of soft jersey material, and it looks very supple and natural. And at one point, there's a very funny scene where she goes into on somebody's yacht, on the kind of patriarchal figure of the film, played by Kurt Jürgens, and there's an older woman there who's wearing the kind of traditional couture dress, very formal dress, and she's sort of glaring at Bardot, and Bardot says to her, do you want to know where I bought my dress? I bought it on the market, on the harbor, and if you like, I'll give you the address. And so she's kind of mocking this woman, but at the same time, that encounter, if you like, to me expresses what Bardot's fashion was about, because she was the kind of anti-haute couture star. She didn't like wearing the kind of formal dresses worn by kind of more traditional stars of the time, and she liked to wear clothes that would look more natural. And so when you see that encounter, you'll see what I mean. When you see that scene on the boat, that she, of course, her dress came from a boutique in Saint-Tropez, a boutique called Christine Vachon, and she, so it's not just any old dress, but it's also a dress that is markedly different from the more formal couture of the day. And in that difference, you also have the important difference in age, the fact that she's elegant and sexy, but young, and the other woman immediately looks much older. I mean, she's probably not that old, but and that really, to me, it sort of expresses what Bardot's style was about, is creating a new type of elegance that was more relaxed, more natural, and was against the sort of old traditional couture houses. And in fact, she's famous for having said at one point, la haute couture, c'est pour les grand-mères. You know, couture is for grandmothers. So she was kind of marking her difference in that way. Anyway, so there's more one could say about it, but I think these, to me, are what makes her, that film so important, and it also became a kind of international success and scandal. It created a scandal in North America, and in fact the American poster for the film says, God created woman, but the devil invented Brigitte Bardot. So there's a kind of play on that.
So there's some information going on in the internet about the costumes for this film, for her being made by Balmain, but it doesn't fit.
No. When Joanna mentioned that to me, first of all, I thought, oh my God, have I missed something incredibly important in my research? But I did check, and in fact, Pierre Balmain represented the kind of haute couture that she was not wearing or not interested in wearing. Balmain designed, Pierre Balmain was obviously a very famous couturier at the time, and he designed some clothes for French stars in French cinema, but usually older stars like Daniel Darieux, Michel Morgan, and so on. And he did design some clothes for Bardot in another film called La Mariée est trop belle. And he also lent her a dress in October 1956. So the film you're about to see was shot in July 56. And it came out in December 56 in Paris, and then in September 57 in America. In October 56, Bardot, who had shot a film in England called Doctor at Sea, was invited to attend the Royal Command performance, so to meet the Queen. And in order to meet the Queen, she was told she had to wear some really smart clothes, and she wore a dress by Balmain. So I think that, to me, a mistake, I mean, I stand to be corrected, of course, but comes from that. The fact that Balmain did design some clothes, including for a Bardot film, and he lent her a dress for the Royal Command performance. But in a way, as I was saying about God Created Woman, Bardot's fashion is precisely against everything to do that is the opposite of what Balmain was about. If we got a minute, I was going to read you. I just got an extract from Bardot's autobiography, which, if you're a French speaker, I recommend you read. It's very funny. Unfortunately, not been translated into English. But this is Bardot talking about going to the Royal Command performance. And she said, Olga and Christine, that was her producer and her agent, took me to Balmain, the classic couturier par excellence. It's amazing how expensive those grand couturier dresses are. It would be enough to make you become a communist. I couldn't see myself spending that much money to be elegant just for one night, and that's probably where my reputation of being mean comes from. But after a lot of discussion, Balmain agreed to lend me a white dress embroidered with pearls and sequins, with a black silk coat, and then she sort of goes on saying how Balmain thought he was being very generous by lending her the dress. So I thought that was a little anecdote is interesting because it confirms this sense of Bardot being not being interested in haute couture. And at the time, in fact, another famous couturier, Coco Chanel, said, oh, I hate this Bardot because she looks like she's coming out of a farm or something. You know, for Chanel, Bardot was not elegant because she was wearing this kind of more natural, more relaxed clothes. So it's that, you know, it's just so I think this idea that Balmain designed the clothes for this film, to me, is completely wrong, and there's absolutely no source that confirms it. And in her autobiography, she says that the woman who was in charge of costume for the film bought her clothes from Vachon on the harbor, as she says in that scene in the film.
Still, even though she criticized haute couture, she did wear Chanel on some occasion.
Later, yes, she did. Yeah.
And she had some collaborations with other fashion designers, like, for example,
yes,
Paco Rabanne. Did she work as well with Dior, Esterel?
A little bit, but yes, there are. You can see pictures of her wearing these. Usually, a bit later than the film we're about to see. What Bardot did, which is part of that kind of revolution she brought with her image, was that she worked with young, new designers at the time. So she worked with people like Louis Ferraud, Jacques Esterel, and people like that, who were a new breed of young designers who these were not cheap clothes. I mean, they for example, au Vachon, they had shops in Saint-Tropez, in Cannes, on the Côte d'Azur, or Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré in Paris. So she also liked the clothes of a shop called Réal and another one called Marie Martin. And these were clothes that no ordinary women could not afford, but at the same time it was not the elevated prices of haute couture, and it was a much more natural, relaxed style. So she kind of helped, and she's famous for having helped those young designers on their career. So for instance, Louis Ferraud said that she made a fortune for him because she wore a white cotton dress that he designed and he was selling in his shop in Cannes, and she bought it, and immediately the shop sold out of the dress. Today we would say it went viral, but obviously this was before the internet, and so and this is part of we've already mentioned the fact that she was imitated to an extraordinary degree, and that's sort of part of that phenomenon. And Christine Vachon did a broderie anglaise dress, which also apparently sold out almost instantly the minute Bardot wore it. And then also very famously, for her second wedding in June 1959, so a little bit after, 3 years after the film, she married Jacques Charrier, and very famously, her wedding dress, you will see it, I think, in one of our images, her wedding dress was made of pink and white gingham. And so that was a kind of typical Bardot provocation of using cloth, I mean, fabric that is usually was used for making tablecloth or baby clothes, and her wedding dress was made of that. And I don't know if the image appears here, but the dress immediately was translated into a pattern that people could buy. It appeared in Elle magazine. So, and that was one of the most imitated dress in the history of French clothing. So that shows her power as a model, if you like, of adopting a simpler, cheaper looking and more accessible kind of fashion, which then meant that she could be imitated by women, by young women at the time, and since then as well. So it was she was not really at that time, at the beginning, particularly interested in haute couture, nor was she wearing really ordinary clothes, but there's a kind of in-between breed of young designers who then became very famous, and in some cases partly because of her, or thanks to her.
Okay. Let's talk now about her hairstyle.
Yeah.
Often looking messy and so much imitated all around the world again.
Yes. Well, first of all, the film you're about to see is the film for which Bardot became a blonde. She was naturally had brown hair, and she bleached it for the film. It's in her autobiography. She even says more or less the date, in April 1956. She became a blonde. So, and what I think is interesting about her hair, which, as you say, became much imitated, is several things. One, the blondness, as you will see, is it looks bleached. I mean, it looks like, you know, it doesn't look particularly natural. But it's meant also, she says herself that Vadim wanted her to do that because to kind of imitate the idea of her hair being bleached by the sun, you know, being on the beach in Saint-Tropez. So but at the same time, it looks very styled in that film. Later on, it kind of changed. The other thing that's interesting about her hair is that it's long. And what's interesting about it, and I think that's one reason why it's been imitated until today by models and other actresses and so on. In 1956, if you look at film stars, almost everywhere, in America, Monroe, in France, Jeanne Moreau or whoever, I mean, other stars, Sophia Loren, so on, they virtually all had short hair, and they had short permed hair, and sort of curly and kind of controlled. And so her hairstyle was all about being free, and this idea of abundance. There's a lot of it. It's very long, it's thick, and it looks kind of a bit wild. And there's a famous scene at the end of the film, God Created Woman, where she dances in a bar in a kind of wild mambo scene, and you look at the way she uses her hair, because she's twirling around, she's moving about, and her hair is absolutely, completely wild, and she really makes use of it. And so when you compare her with the big stars of the time, that was another way in which she asserted her difference, by having the blonde hair was quite common, because and part of it was to imitate her idol of the time, who was Marilyn Monroe, and the idea of stardom, Hollywood stardom at the time, was very much the idea of a blonde, and so that blondness is a kind of a nod towards Hollywood stars, and also I think it was probably in Vadim and her mind about becoming a blonde made her more like a star. But at the same time, she didn't go for the shorter control style. It's kind of really long and wild. So there's that kind of abundance and huge splash of color, and the way she uses it. But at the same time, that long hair again makes her look younger, because it's more like a little girl. You know, she's got a fringe and she's got that long hair. It looks more, quote-unquote, natural in that way. So she's making a statement by the clothes she's wearing, and she's making a statement by the way she does her hair.
Really fascinating. I'm sure that someone from the public may have some question. No?
No? Well, I have to give people time to think about it. How many people have seen the film before? Ah, okay. So, well, it's great. It means that many of you will discover it, which is wonderful. So, I don't know, people, do you have any comments or questions?
Perhaps in the meantime, you could tell me about, or tell us about the Lancel bag, the Lancel BB bag. Did she participate in the creation? When was it produced?
Yes, she did. I've forgotten the exact date, but about 10 years ago, Lancel, the bag maker, created a bag called Le Bardot. And she had an important input in it, not so much in the design, but some of you may know that Bardot, since she stopped making films in 1973, she's been very active as an animal rights activist, and she's created a foundation for the welfare of animals, and so she's very much against fur, and she's very much against animal experiments and so on. And she's been very vocal in that fight, and so the bag she insisted that it must not be leather, so it's made in some fabric, or I'm not quite sure what to call it, called Alcantara, which is not a material, sorry, which is not leather, which sort of looks like suede leather, and it's been very successful. bag. You can buy it in different colors, and some of them have lining in gingham, of course. So it's very much styled to evoke Bardot and her style. But for her, the crucial thing was that it must not be leather. Yeah.
Do you have now any question from the public?
Well, good question. Yes, she had quite a lot of say, and that's partly to do with French cinema as opposed to Hollywood. So, and it meant that she, and if you look at her autobiography, for example, it's a long story of her usually arguments with her agent called Olga, who was very patient woman who's trying to guide her, and she generally had a lot of say, but she also listened to the director. But for example, on a very famous film she made called Le Mépris, Contempt, directed by Godard, there's a lot of anecdotes about the fight between them, because Godard was trying to control her, wanted her to wear longer skirts, wanted her to hide her hair and put her in a black wig at some point. And I see it personally as a kind of fighting against her power. So she was, between 56, the film you're about to see, and about 63, 64, she was a really massively successful star in French cinema and internationally. After that, the success of the film decreased, but she was still remained very well known as a celebrity. But so yes, she had, there's much more, the French film industry is less regimented, if you like, than Hollywood. And it partly depended on who the director was. Now, with Vadim, he wanted her to be herself, quote unquote, and they bought the clothes in Saint-Tropez. And he just wanted her be herself. When she worked with somebody like Godard, or somebody like Henri-Georges Clouzot for a film called La Vérité, which is a wonderful film, and apparently her favorite nowadays. And Clouzot is a very controlling director, and they had a lot of fights, and they slapped each other at one point. So there was it was a sort of give and take. But because in French cinema, on the one hand, the director has more power over the producer, but Bardot was such a huge star that she could really dictate to some extent what she could wear. So she did have a lot of say in that. And for instance, one of the young designers I mentioned, Louis Ferraud, after they discovered each other, as it were, he designed clothes for a number of her other films. So the film she made in '57 called Une Parisienne, Louis Ferraud did the clothes for that. And for a few others as well. And there's a film called En cas de malheur in '58, where Ferraud did her clothes and Balmain did the clothes for Edwige Feuillère, who plays the older woman. So you still have that distinction between the two. But it's a good question because, and of course, in some cases, you have to piece together the evidence. Like, of course, her autobiography, I'm not naive enough to think that she's telling the truth all the time. You have to kind of, but cross-referencing, it looks like it was very much, she knew what suited her. And in fact, one of the things that tells you that she had control is the fact that what she wore in the film is very similar to what she wore off-screen. So when you see pictures of her, anywhere in Paris or wherever, and you see her in the films, it's quite similar. So, so either she dictated it, or the directors wanted her to look like, what her style was saying. He wrote a book about his women, Bardot, Fonda, and so on. I think one of the things I would say very briefly is that, as Bardot herself said, yes, I owe a lot to Vadim. He created my character, but he also owes a lot to me. So I think because it was Vadim's first film as a director. He'd written some scripts. this was his first attempt as a director, and no doubt the success of the film, which was really largely due to Bardot, as well as him, launched him on his career as well. But it's actually quite telling that a lot of the films he's done subsequently haven't been as interesting or as good, I think, as God Created Woman. So it was a partnership, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming today. Ginette Vincende has written 2 books about Brigitte Bardot. I have read them, and I really recommend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.